Hello, ladies and gentlemen. How are y'all? Is everybody having a good holiday break? I sincerely hope so. Some of y'all out there, you might not even be taking a break. Maybe you're out there plowing through the snow. Or maybe you're washing some dishes. Or prepping food for some nice yuppie couple who decided to go out in the cold conditions and exploit the labor of the masses. Well, I don't know if that's full-on exploitation, but at the same time, it's kind of that feeling again. It's like, oh well, let's go and out into the hazardous weather and enjoy ourselves at the expense of much poorer people who have a much harder time getting around in the very frigid cold weather that we are in today. I actually walked to the studio earlier. It was nippity, to say the least. So, kind of long lollygagging intro there. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. It is a weekly show where we try to dig underneath the headlines, expose the establishment's BS, and more or less talk about the things that the mainstream corporate media is not talking about. That includes issues that are national, international, and local in scale. And granted, I'll tell you that there's not too much local news. Things gone kind of quiet in the last, I'd say, week and a half. The tax stuff was really hopping. We had a lot of local protests, about three different local demonstrations against the GOP tax scam. And there were also several demonstrations earlier this month in regards to net neutrality. Oh, sometimes the power of the people just isn't enough, and I will tell you, before I go any further, just a little housekeeping. The following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. And I say that because I'm about to say something a little, well, I don't know if it's necessarily a downer, but it is perhaps a bit controversial, and it is that I am so tired of going out to these demonstrations, and a lot of the times I'll be organizing or taking points on them, and what do we repeat like a mantra? Call your representative, write your senator, write your house rep, your city councilman, your county commissioner, etc., etc. And I will say, to the extent, if we're gonna do, we're gonna leave the real meat and potatoes here in review for next week, but from my experience, you shouldn't despair entirely, because while at the federal level, yeah, it looks like the majority of our government's basically been bought and sold out right in front of us, right under our noses. There is still a lot of efficacy that public pressure can have at a local level, and we're also seeing, at least the context of net neutrality, there is some push from the grassroots to get Congress to bring it before a vote, which essentially the Democrats and I don't even know if there are any Republicans sitting who are against, who are for net neutrality. Now, there's some kind of right-wing libertarian folks who are, but there is still that avenue that we can get Congress to demand a vote on it. And this is basically a provision. Any particular federal agency changes their rules in such a drastic way, then it is with just a handful of petitioners who are sitting Congress people, they can demand that the rule change be put forth on a vote. Now, here's the tricky thing with that is, there's also a lot of Democrats who are in the pockets of these very same telecoms that, put Ajit Pai on his trajectory, and that includes, Michigan State Senator, or not Michigan State, but Michigan Senator Gary Peters, who actually confirmed Ajit Pai as FCC chair and has taken a lot of money from the telecommunications industry. And, the chief point is, am I tired or what of telling people, call your representative? Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But it's astounding that people have to make these phone calls. And I think I've said this on a previous show, between the tax bill and the successful fight to defend what, faulty healthcare system in this country we actually do have. It has been the people fighting and yelling and, cajoling their representatives over basic rights and needs. This isn't like, we demand this new program, we demand this. No, we demand that you do not rent seek the poor. We demand that you do not, we demand that you protect our constitutionally guaranteed First Amendment rights on the internet. We demand that we don't arbitrarily keep out people based on nationality or religion. We demand that we live up to the words that were written on the Statue of Liberty. Give me you're tired, you're poor, not, give me whoever you have that has enough money or is already connected to somebody of note or power inside the United States. Because, what a lot of people don't know, our immigration system is pretty labyrinthian, Kafkaesque, I would even say. It is extremely difficult to immigrate legally to the United States, even more so if you're trying to seek asylum. There's actually been a rash of Mexican journalists who have been trying to seek asylum to the United States because, by the way, Mexico is a very, very unsafe place to be a journalist. Some of the highest murder rates against journalists in the world. And what does our government denies it, of course. Because our government is not even pretending to be nice anymore. You know what the tax scam is? The government just saying, like, we don't care anymore. Like, why are we even pretending to people anymore? And granted, they'll come out with all this lather about, it's gonna help the middle class. It's gonna help the middle class. It's gonna help the middle class for a couple of years until anybody making less than $70,000 is gonna actually see a tax increase. Although, I don't know, I guess one would have to really define what is middle class anymore. And by a lot of rubrics, some people have said, like, if you make $200,000 a year, like, who do you know that makes that much? I mean, I probably know a handful of people, but who do you know under the age of 30 who makes that kind of money legally? Anyway. So that's what's going on this year. And speaking of the rich versus the poor, I found this fun little article from the Smithsonian, and I thought since it was just Christmas a couple of days ago, I wanted to talk about this interesting article from the Smithsonian that gives some history about It's a Wonderful Life, which is, of course, the beloved Christmas classic starring Jimmy Stewart, where, he decides after a a litany of tragedies. Like basically the Alanis Morissette song happens to him. It's like 10,000 spoons. All you need is a knife, but a lot more overtly tragic and stressful. And Jimmy Stewart's character decides he wants to off himself. Angel Clarence comes down, shows him what his life would be like if he had not ever actually been born. And much like another Christmas classic, it really hit the sweet spot in talking about economic realities, and with a little bit of holiday mythicism and mysticism rolled up into it. But it actually wasn't very popular when it first came out, and there were some people who were definitely not fans of it, and that would be the FBI. What's wrong with It's a Wonderful Life? Well, as it details in the article, an unnamed FBI agent who watched the film as part of a larger FBI program aimed at detecting and neutralizing commie influences in Hollywood. And this is part of the J. Edgar Hoover era, where they were going after anybody who could possibly have ties to Soviet Russia. Does that sound familiar? Familiar to anybody? Okay. Anyway. As written by scholar John A. Noakes, the agent, who thought it was a very entertaining film, by the way, also identified what they considered a malignant undercurrent in the film. As a result of the report, the film underwent further industry probes that uncovered that those responsible for making It's a Wonderful Life had employed two common tricks used by communists to inject propaganda into the film. These two common devices or tricks, as described by the Los Angeles branch of the Bureau, were smearing values or institutions judged to be particularly American. In this case, talking about, Mr. Potter as the capitalist banker, and glorifying values or institutions judged to be particularly anti-American or pro-communist. In this case, and he referenced this agent did. Depression and existential crisis, which the FBI report characterized as a subtle attempt to magnify the problems of the so-called common man in society. So, I'm going to take a quick detour to kind of compare and contrast. So, this is some of the language the FBI was using at the time to describe It's a Wonderful Life. And to anybody listening to that, you're probably going to think it's very antiquated, very kind of unevolved way of looking at that film, trying to find, communists hiding in between the film frames, more or less. But how different is that from a lot of what we see today? So, what comes to mind, if y'all remember, this was several months ago, back last winter, when they dropped that initial report. This was I believe it was the CIA, NSA, the one that they talk about being like the 17 intelligence agencies. And it was about a 26-page report, 13 pages of which were spent talking exclusively about RT. RT America, the Russian-owned or Russian-affiliated foreign broadcasting network. They're kind of similar to there was Al Jazeera America, BBC America. It was their American. Well, it is. RT America still is a thing for at least the time being. It is the American branch, and it accused. This report from the CIA, NSA, accused RT America of being anti-American propaganda. Now, Does it do this by slandering us or spreading untruths? No, the report, and this is from the CIA and NSA, said attempts included highlighting things like the dangers of fracking, Occupy, various grassroots social movements and activists. And this is what it says in the report. It talks about it as a bad thing. Also calls them out for hosting third-party candidates. So, like, apparently all of these things that I just talked about are un-American. And a lot of those things that they cited RT of being guilty of doing, this propaganda, those are things that also magnify the problems of the so-called common man in society. There's a common thread between, you know, the overt, specifically communist centered Red Scare of the 50s, 60s, really on through the 70s and 80s, and what we are experiencing now, where this ideology, which in this case is even a kind of a shakier foundation now, as Russia is just as capitalistic as America, but it's this idea that subversive ideas are tied to foreign enemy entities, ideas that threaten the power structure of the United States, the big money capitalists like Mr. Potter. And they're branded. And back then it was with, the scarlet hammer and sickle. There were people whose careers were ruined over this. And like they say in Battlestar, all this has happened before and all this has happened again. And there are probably FBI, CIA, NSA reports now that are evaluating the media that we watch every day. I wouldn't be surprised. So I've been watching like The Punisher on Netflix, and for those of you who haven't watched it, there's a lot of very interesting kind of commentary in there about PTSD, about the nature of warfare and morality, characters who are kind of influenced by their trauma to commit horrible stuff. And I do wonder, it's like, there's probably a file in there about, or the end of the Defenders, for example. And I keep using Marvel Netflix shows as an example, but okay, well here's just deconstruct spoilers. But end of the Defenders. This isn't really a spoiler. They have to save the day. They have to get together. It's most likely that they all have to do something super illegal. So they're basically all risking their freedom in order to do it. But they do it anyway for the good of the city, which I thought was kind of like, some sort of a metaphor for civil disobedience or something like that. But yeah, there's probably some FBI file about that in there somewhere. Especially because, there's actually a connection. There are connections between certain CIA ops and the Marvel films. I don't have that article on me at the moment, but that is something perhaps we can talk about on a future program. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's like making sure that their investment pays the right dividends and doesn't stray into too overtly political territory. Though I think after the Winter Soldier, we probably got a lot more anxious about that kind of stuff. All right, so getting back to this article about how It's a Wonderful Life is a bunch of commie propaganda. George Bailey, the film's protagonist, is also a small-scale community bank manager. And seen from one perspective, his competition with aggressive tycoon and Scrooge stand-in Harry F. Potter, who runs a competing bank, tells a larger story about American business and industry. In the moment of post-war paranoia, even the idea of a community bank could be read as communist. And George Bailey's deep unhappiness in a quintessentially American small-town life could be perceived as failure, which was broadly portrayed as communist as well. But the story of the movie is much subtler than that, writes Noakes. It's a Wonderful Life depicts a struggle between two bankers, each representing a different vision of capitalism and democracy. However, The FBI's apparatus was set up to provide Hoover with the answers he wanted to hear. Either a movie was subversive or it wasn't. And in the Bureau's broad framing, this one certainly was. The organization handed over the results of its investigation to HUAC, presaging the organizational cooperation that was a hallmark of McCarthyist Hollywood witch hunts. However, in this case, HUAC chose not to call in the film's writers and directors. The film continued to be shown unimpeded. So, I guess like the main reason I brought this story up was just to highlight how something so innocuous could be viewed as a threat by our government, and how, this continues to happen today. Things that, greater history will probably look on a lot more kindly and a lot less divisively. Let's look at all of the kneeling athletes, who I can guarantee you, like, a lot of the people who currently find it disrespectful or think it's an inappropriate way to protest. There were those same white people who said the same thing about Martin Luther King and the freedom struggles of the 1960s. And I'm sure 30, 40 years from now, those same white people would be like, oh, I stood with Kaepernick, and their grandkids will act befuddled and be like, why did anybody ever have a problem with that? And then they'll find something that makes them mad and will embarrass their grandchildren for them getting mad about the circle of white liberal life, I guess. Well, no, I mean, that's a bit of a misnomer. Most of the people who support the kneeling are the liberal types, and the people who don't support it have been bamboozled into being distracted from the actual people sucking the economic lifeblood out of their households. So, so yeah, there's that holiday classic, which was actively monitored by the FBI. And, I think actually a lot of these Christmas classics you could find kind of subversive messages in. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, apparently, being odd or off the beaten path is only good if it's exploitable, which... you see that in our broader society too. Like, we portray all our geniuses and entrepreneurs and CEOs. Oh, they're eccentric, they're quirky. But if they didn't have the great capitalistic success, they would be seen as a weirdo to be ostracized and kept at arm's length. Maybe Rudolph too. He educates the rest of the reindeer about how their surplus labor is being used by Santa, and then there's a little socialist uprising over the North Pole. I could also say, let's bring Frosty back. I'm sure he could have a few things to say about climate change, but then again, he might not really last the movie all that long. Because he'll melt. Unless it happens to be this cold snap that most of the Midwest is in, then he'll be fine for a few days before it inevitably we have a weekend of 60-degree weather sometime in January, and then there's another blizzard again. It's as the weather cycles, So, yeah, just some fun things to talk about. Well, not really fun, but just kind of giving some historical context to, how our government has viewed so-called wholesome entertainment with these pretty general values of, be a good person, don't be greedy, appreciate the people in your life and who you love, and push through the bad days because good days are sure to come. But no, subversive. It's a bunch of commie propaganda and trash. I don't know where A Christmas Story would fall on in that particular continuum. I mean, I don't know. It says something about consumerism. Oh, I want my Red Ryder BB gun. He ends up shooting his glasses apart. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling at this point. Let's go ahead and go to a break. Come back, we'll touch on some other stories. You're listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
It may not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Are you trying to get your local Kalamazoo business name out to the WMU and Greater Kalamazoo communities? Why not do so while supporting Radio Evolution through underwriting and donations? For more information, please visit widrfm.org.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. So, want to talk about this next story, which is, it's another, hey, Democrats, you should really help out your base and a marginalized community by using your political power to do something about it. And they didn't. What was going to happen, the spending bill that would continue government operations, there was a push to include a provision in there to support the Dreamers, which, if you are unaware, that is the people who are recipients of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. Several months ago, Trump's administration said they were going to discontinue the program, and this was their attempt to put some financial protections in there. Basically, this would have put the Democrats in the position to do something similar to a Republican tactic. Kind of be like, we will risk a government shutdown in order to push through this provision for our base, which is, basically helping out undocumented folks who've been working and living here in America for years. Many of them since they were very small children. But not enough Democrats followed through on it. And I want to talk to you about, this is a story from The Intercept. There was some civil disobedience that followed this kind of failure to act. This is from an article in The Intercept. Undocumented youth are not bargaining chips, say dreamers arrested on Capitol Hill. It's from December 22nd by Daniel A. Medina. Erica Andiola breathed a sigh of relief as she was walked outside of a Washington, D.C. jail on Wednesday night. She'd spent 5 days there but avoided her worst nightmare, being handed over to immigration authorities. She made national headlines when she was arrested on Capitol Hill last Friday, along with a group of dreamers, undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as minors, who won protections under an Obama-era program rescinded by President Trump. Capitol Police arrested the 7 dreamers and 1 ally after they staged a sit-in in the offices of Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Representative Carlos Curbelo, Republican from Florida. Andiola and her fellow protesters were on a hunger strike while in jail, and her Facebook post about being detained went viral over the weekend. The group was demanding that Schumer and Curbelo vote against a must-pass federal spending bill unless it contains a measure known as the DREAM Act, which would bring protections for dreamers without any compromises on harsher immigration policies. In a sign of intra-party tension on the issue, more than a dozen members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus followed the Dreamers' lead and stormed Schumer's office Tuesday afternoon before demanding answers to the delay on the measure addressing the Dreamers. On Thursday evening, a day after the Dreamer activists were released, Congress passed a temporary stopgap spending bill to avoid a government shutdown. The bill merely extends government funding until January 19th and did not include any of the measures on the Dreamers. Schumer and Curbelo kept their word by voting against the bill, but reports circulated Thursday evening indicating that Schumer had failed to whip his caucus against the bill. 17 Democrats voted for the bill in the Senate, allowing the measure to pass without any fix for the Dreamers. And who were some of these Democrats that did not vote along these lines to help enshrine the DREAM Act and help protect the Dreamers? Gee, I wonder. Yeah. Is it anybody we know? Well. Yep, both Gary Peters and Debbie Snabenow, both of Michigan's Democratic senators, did not stand up with the Dreamers and decided to pass the spending bill without the Dreamer provision. So there's not really a good reason for them to not do this. Otherwise, all that can really be said is, there's a temerity, a timidness in a lot of these corporate establishment Democrats to do something like risk a government shutdown that the Republicans were more than willing to do while Obama was in office. And let's be clear, they were willing to do that over disagreements about, say, Obamacare, which again was a Republican health care bill to begin with. This is about protecting people's lives. It's about protecting citizens of this country who, yeah, maybe they don't have a social security number, but they are de facto Americans, people who've lived here most of their lives. And you know, what does the opposition, what does the quote-unquote resistance have to do or say about it? Not enough. That's what they have not enough to say about it. That's for damn sure. And you know, let's go to somebody else's voice. This is Murshid Zahid, and he is the political director of Credo, which works on immigration issues. And he says, it's a pathetic way for the Democratic Party's leadership to close out a year in which millions of Americans fought back and resisted the Trump regime's racist, xenophobic, and dangerous agenda, an inspiring wave of grassroots activism from coast to coast. And you know what? I think that's really where it is. Like, what is this political party doing in Congress? Other than following like one false alarm after another on the Russiagate investigation, the Mueller investigation. What are they doing? Because we have been out here. I've been across the country. I've mostly been like organizing my butt off here in Kalamazoo, but I see it everywhere. People are out in the streets to a degree I have never seen before. People are fighting. Some people are dying to protect their neighbors. People will give up their time, their energy to go out and watch out for one another. Watch their neighbors. Make sure they're safe. Make sure they don't get kidnapped by ICE. And our two senators can't even bother using the leverage that they have to try to protect those people. Why? Because it's not politically convenient, or it's rude, or we don't want to use those tactics. You know how this year ended? The Republicans got this horrible tax bill through that amounts to class warfare. That's going to strip mine anybody who makes less than $75,000 a year. A handful of Democrats were actually outspoken about it. Most of them probably kept their mouths shut because, let's be clear, a lot of those Democrats on Capitol Hill get money from the same people that the Republicans do. But no. Neither of our state senators felt that it was important enough or strategic enough or what have you to use their power to try to defend and fund these dreamers, these people who do not deserve to have their lives completely and utterly disrupted because it plays well to a dog-whistled base that a corrupt billionaire idiot in the White House is feeding crumbs to every now and again. Or I guess feeding like bits of Trump steak, I guess would be the more appropriate metaphor. But, so give you a little bit more context here. Politico reported last week that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly met with a bipartisan group of senators on Tuesday to hammer out a compromise. The proposed deal, according to Politico, would include security measures such as expanding the existing border fence. It would not be considered until January. The Dreamers said any promise for a deal in an election year is unlikely, and they opposed tacking on other harsh immigration policies. Politicians have been telling us since 2001 that they want to pass a DREAM Act, said Lee Adorno, 24-year-old community organizer who was among those arrested. It's 2017. We are sick of waiting. We are sick of empty words. The group's decision to protest outside Curbelo and Schumer's offices was strategic, said Adorno. Both members of Congress have been outspoken supporters of passing a law with DACA-like protections in this congressional session. Curbelo has been one of the few members of the Republican caucus to demand a legislative solution before the year's end. For his part, Schumer has heavily criticized Trump's decision to end DACA and made numerous predictions that a Clean Dream Act, without compromises like the border fence, would reach the president's desk by December 31st. In recent weeks, however, Schumer has backed off from that pledge as Democrats up for re-election in more conservative states in 2018 have pushed back. So again, this is about political calculation. It's about doing the easy work. Because you know what the hard work is to go out to your constituents and have conversations and have dialogue and try to explain to the best of your ability how it's not immigrants, it's not Mexicans that are taking your job. They're being outsourced by mega corporations who then make it as easy as they can to outsource whatever work is left to cheap immigrant labor. It's not the immigrants' fault. That's the boss's fault. And you know what? If your stance on immigration, if you are too sheepish to challenge that dog whistle narrative, then you shouldn't be a politician. You certainly shouldn't be running as a supposed leftist, somebody on the left. Although, I mean, the Democrats are a center-right party. We know this, but it's despicable. And again, this is centrist, like learning all the. I mean, for God's sake, a trans woman won in West Virginia. Do you know how she won? Did she magically make everyone one in her district? An ally of LGBT people? No. She had policy solutions. And she stood by her values. She didn't buckle under them because they think, oh, well, a few more percentage points will help us dig into the part of the Republican constituency that thinks that brown people from Mexico are the root of all their problems. You know, the crossover that a lot of people talk about, people who like voted for Bernie who then went on to vote for Trump, people understood the message that he was giving, that yes, in fact, they are being screwed over, but here are the people who are actually doing it. Who are the people who are really screwing you? It's not the Mexicans, it's not the Muslims, it's a bunch of these rich people sitting around making calculations about how miserable they can make your life before you decide to get up and revolt. Where that margin is, where they can find that place where they can make the most profit without actually dealing with an underclass rebellion. It's disgusting. And I don't know exactly what was in Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow's calculus, but they do toe the corporate Democrat line. Maybe they got spooked because Trump won this state. You know who else won the state? Bernie Sanders. The state, you know, it even talking about Michigan as red or blue or even purple is a little blasé. There is definitely a big undercurrent of racism in a lot of parts of Michigan, but first and foremost, it's this innate distrust of people in power, of government, but also of corporations. And, you know, there's a lot of people in Michigan who get that, who understand that. And you know what? If you have no alternative to give them, then yeah, maybe hard to blame you for not standing up for the rights of dreamers when you have nothing to offer. You have I'm not as bad as Trump. I'm not as bad as whatever Republicans senatorial candidate is going to run against me, I won't do anything to make your life better, but I'm not going to actively try to make it worse like these Republicans will. Yeah, it's what resistance is that? What kind of resistance is that exactly? We'll fight for the people, but only when we feel it's politically convenient. And yeah, it's really, like I said, especially in the context of these shattering, horrible victories for the corporate class in the last month with the tax bill and net neutrality. This could have been something to at least get, end the year out on a good note, that we're fighting for our people. The one really big opportunity that the Democrats had to step up to the plate and actually make a demand and have a substantial chance of victory, they buckled, and they didn't do it. Because you know what? Look, there are a lot of things they could have done with the tax bill. They could have filibustered. They could have been a lot more vocal. But yeah, it would have been harder for them to outright stop it. This wouldn't have been all that difficult for the Democrats to do, to try to push for this. Use their leverage. But they don't want to make waves. They don't want to shut the government down. They don't want to do something that could potentially look bad to a couple percentage points of people in various red states. Look, we talk a lot about on the show the kind of, both parties are bad. Are they the same? No. I would say the Republicans are a bit worse. But the Republicans are a bit worse has basically been the Democrats' tagline for the last quarter century. We're not as bad as them, which allows the Republicans to go further and further and further right until you get to this point where we have openly racist, toxic people running for Congress again. Open racists like Jeff Sessions. Trump was like a harbinger of all this stuff, but we have allowed the right to go uncontested for so long that the slime is coming out of the woodwork. I mean, even just 10 years ago, the idea of somebody like Roy Moore running for Jeff Sessions seats would have been absolutely unthinkable. Absolutely unthinkable. And here we are, a great lesson. So centrists can win. Centrists can win. Yeah, when they're running against a freaking racist pedophile. Yeah, I suppose they can win by like less than a percentage point. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that they have no values that they actually stand for. Now you'll find there are individual Democrats who actually behave as though their party has values. But the party as a whole, they don't. And the biggest problem with that is Republicans, they do have values. They have a very clear agenda. The Democrats, they don't have one. When they need to consolidate their energy and really step up to the plate in a situation like this and prove why they're actually the resistance, they buckle. But they'll spend all day talking about whatever minutia has popped up in the Mueller investigation. They found a receipt from a McDonald's in Moscow and Donald Trump's left front pocket. It's hard to properly emphasize how much of a disappointment this is. And it's really just another kind of warped mirror reflection of the reality we've been living in since 2016. We've fundamentally put ourselves in a whole different world, and a lot of the same tropes are there. The forces of fascism are on the rise, and the main liberal bourgeoisie party that's supposed to be there to fight it off is ineffectual. Ralph Nader was interviewed by The Intercept several months ago, and he said he talked about just how inexcusable we have, like, the most just downright craven and toxic Republican Party in history, and the opposition party, that being the Democrats, they can't do anything about it. The victories that they have had have been people that they don't actively support. There's people like Danica Rome, the DSA candidate who just won down in I think it was West Virginia. They didn't get support from the mainstream Democratic Party. Those people who won were the first to the left. People that corporate Democrats have been trying to ostracize. Yeah, there is a resistance, but it's not the manufactured one that you see on CNN and MSNBC. It's not the one made of people who, knit pink hats, went to a rally in Washington, and went home, and, their version of activism amounts to sharing Russiagate updates on Facebook. That's not the resistance. The resistance are people like the Dreamers, who went in there and risked their freedom and their ability to live in this country that they were raised in order to speak truth to power, to call out Chuck Schumer, call out Carlos Curbelo, and demand an answer as to why. Why was their opposition so ineffectual that they could not even use, the congressional budget to help these people? It's ridiculous. Merry Christmas. Yeah, I think Chuck Schumer, you didn't work hard enough to get your corporate crony Democrat caucus butts to make the right choice. And Debbie Stabenow, Gary Peters, y'all need to be primaried. They need their butts primaried. This is inexcusable and a long line of inexcusable things. Like I said earlier, Gary Peters is totally fine with the dismantling of net neutrality. Debbie Stabenow has a really poor track record when it comes to a lot of environmental issues in the state, including fracking. And they threw Dreamers and the Hispanic community at large under the bus. A community, by the way, that also African Americans, but these two communities need an opposition party to fight for their issues more than ever, because as we see, they are the ones that can make a difference on election day between whether we get somebody who's not a pedophile. And Doug Jones has been pretty disappointing since he got elected too. Again, he's trying to triangulate to the right, I guess, to get all the votes of the people who didn't vote for him. Voted for Roy Moore, who literally, like, how do you pander to those people? Because I mean, like, at that point, their literal or only argument left was, I'm resorted to either, like, voting for a pedophile or a Democrat. And, that was a hand-wringing situation. Granted, a lot of that constituency are, they're single-issue voters when it comes to things like gun rights and abortion. But again, like, why isn't Doug Jones embracing the young people, embracing the African American community? Why isn't there or aren't there going to be any black people on his staff? Because again, Democrats would rather pander to a white heteronormative base that is never going to support them in full force the way they want them to, than to actually work for constituencies that time and time again have saved their butts in various elections, and with not really all that much to show for it. Just go ask the people of Chicago. So I think with that, we're going to take a quick little break. We'll have a few more things to talk about before we wrap the show up. I think I will be heading out a little bit early tonight. I'm flying solo, and it's post-holiday, so we've got a few other important updates to talk about here on the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo.
But I got to be in a movie. I had a small scene in the movie. But I got to act with Peter Frampton. He was in the movie. And we had to smoke pot for our scene. But it was fake pot. Do not buy pot on a movie set. But I got to smoke fake pot with Peter Frampton. That's a cool story. It's as cool as smoking real pot with a guy who looks like Peter Frampton.
WIDR.
I've done that way more.
Your only source for non-commercial radio.
Now stay away from me, Frampton. I ain't got to say to you.
WIDR is proud to be supported by Pedal Bicycle. Pedal Bicycle has 2 locations, on 611 West Michigan Ave and 185 Romans Road. More information can be found at pedalbicycle.com.
You are now listening to our weekly RSO Spotlight.
Hi, I'm Alex Felice.
And I'm Kelly Coffee Tabby.
We are proud members of Sigma Kappa Sorority.
We live our day-to-day values of loyalty, personal growth, friendship, and service.
We are the main benefactor for the Alzheimer's Association.
If you would like to learn more about Sigma Kappa's involvement in Greek life,
visit our website at wmish.sigmakappa.org
or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Sigma Kappa WMU.
For more information on this week's RSO, you can visit westernherald.com, YBOT WMU on YouTube, or widerfm.org.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So let's talk a little bit about, there's this article that was just published on Common Dreams last Friday. And, okay, so we're talking a little bit about the tax bill earlier in the show. Specifically, it's class warfare. And when we're talking about class warfare, well, you know what? It's not just Congress who's involved. Oh, no. There's this latest bit from everyone's favorite racist Keebler elf, Jeff Sessions, and he just threw some more pee on the whole trickle down machine here. So let's talk a little bit about what Mr. Jeff Sessions just did. This is from a Common Dreams article by Julia Conley. Horrifying step backwards as Sessions retracts guidance designed to end abuse of poor by courts. It says Attorney General abandons directive to protect the poor from needless fines. Civil rights advocates accused Attorney General Jeff Sessions of turning back the clock on criminal justice reforms after the DOJ, Department of Justice, rescinded Obama-era guidance that protected low-income defendants from being forced to pay gratuitous fees to local courts. Profit-minded court policies targeting the most economically vulnerable Americans have resulted in a resurgence of unconstitutional but widespread practices penalizing the poor and people of color, said Kristen Clark, president of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law. Attorney General Jeff Sessions' decision to retract guidance from the Justice Department rooting out practices resulting in a perpetual cycle of fines, debt, and jail of America's poor is a horrifying step backwards in ongoing efforts to reform the criminal justice system. And it goes on to talk a little bit about what the Barack Obama administration put out regarding this. And I'll read a little bit about that. Individuals may confront escalating debt, face repeated unnecessary incarceration for non-payment despite posing no danger to the community, lose their jobs, and become trapped in cycles of poverty that can be nearly impossible to escape, wrote Vanita Gupta, the head of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division at the time, and former Office for Access to Justice Director Lisa Foster. Furthermore, in addition to being unlawful to the extent that these practices are geared not toward addressing public safety, but rather towards raising revenue, they can cast doubt on the impartiality of the tribunal and erode trust between local governments and their constituents. Cited by Gupta and Foster, here's some examples. Unfair demands for payment made by municipal courts, including drivers who would be ordered to pay a penalty of $300 for a driving citation and told that a court date could only be scheduled after the payment was made. Such requirements can have the effect of denying access to justice to the poor, they wrote. Sessions said Friday he was reversing the guidance to combat the long-standing abuse of issuing rules by simply publishing a letter or posting a webpage and to prevent confusing the public with improper and wrong advice. Gupta told the Washington Post that Sessions' decision seems like an abdication of the Justice Department's responsibility to guide municipal efforts, or municipal courts. I think it takes the pressure off of some jurisdictions that may have been more reluctant to engage in reform, she said. So, again, like what this does, and there was a push, you know, like this article says, back in the Obama administration, people in that Department of Justice, to reel back practices of a lot of cities where they look at law enforcement as a profit-raising or a profit-making enterprise, or at least like a way to raise municipal funds. You know, there's a lot of stories of like police departments that have certain quotas as far as like how many folks you're supposed to pull over, and you know that ticket money gets put right back into their budget. I mean, I think the most overt example of that would be the private prison industry, where there's actually been several instances lately, and there have been articles about this, of private prison corporations actually suing states for not funneling enough prisoners into their prisons. So again, this puts poor people at a disadvantage when we have somebody like Jeff Sessions and his Department of Justice who are effectively saying their hands are going to be off this. They're not going to oversee or watch municipal courts for these kind of rights infringements that involve financial penalization. So, yeah, that's what they'll do. First, they'll tax you into poverty. And then the police will pull you over on a bogus charge because they need to keep up with their quota. And then you will have such expensive court fees that you won't be able to deal with it. And guess what? What do they do? Why don't they just recreate debtors' prisons? Let's just get to the point. This is the trajectory of where this all seems to be going anyway. So again, we can thank everyone's favorite racist Keebler elf, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, for stripping away protections that poor people have against getting ripped off by their local courts for courtroom fees. And again, like, you know, what really boggles me is part of what fueled Trump's rise and his trajectory and really fired up his base was this idea that, I'm going to, you know, because I'm rich, my hands are clean, however that's supposed to work. But also, like, he promised to, like, bring some kind of justice, that he was going to punish these corporations that were shipping jobs overseas. That, you know, he's going to lock up Hillary Clinton, you know, lock her up. And all that his administration has done is made it easier for the very same type of poor people that voted for him in a lot of parts of this country to end up being sent to jail without any financial recourse or being stuck with a bunch of legal costs that they cannot effectively pay. Of course, if you're rich, you don't have to worry about court fees or court costs. Chances are you could probably just, build the community a new park or a new, like, football stadium, and you can probably get out of just about any sort of deserved justice that needs to be or should be wrought against you. So, again, this is just another front, another stab of class warfare that puts poor people at a disadvantage, and that basically financially victimizes them at the hands of the American justice system. So let's move on to another story that isn't getting a whole lot of attention, which really should. So if you've been following international affairs at all, you know the situation in Yemen is extremely dire. And a large part of that, what you may not know, because I believe the 60 Minutes talked about the situation without even really talking about our role in it. The weapons that Saudi Arabia is raining down upon Yemen, the bombs and their resources are provided by the United States. Actually, recently, Trump actually did something kind of good and asked them to cut it out, at least to the extent that, aid could be brought into children. Well, when somebody like Donald Trump actually steps in and says you're acting amoral, like, good God, like, how bad do you have to be when, like, a narcissistic psychopath like our current president says it's like, that's just inhumane. Maybe stop bombing him for just a couple of days so you can get some water and some food in for all the sad-looking little babies. They showed me a bunch of pictures of babies, and now I'm sad, because his brain's wired like some kind of kindergartners. Anyway, this is an article from the World Socialist website. by Bill Van Auken. Pentagon admits presence of U.S. troops in Yemen as cholera cases top 1 million. The Pentagon admitted for the first time this week that it conducted multiple ground operations in Yemen, the impoverished and war-ravaged country on the Arabian Peninsula, while conducting more than 120 airstrikes there this year, triple the number in 2016. Multiple aid agencies issued statements warning the deaths of millions are threatened as the war claims more victims and plunges vast portions of the population into conditions of famine and disease. The depth of the country's humanitarian crisis was underscored this week by an announcement by the International Committee of the Red Cross that the number of cholera cases in Yemen had reached 1 million, making this ongoing epidemic by far the worst in recorded human history. Cholera is easily preventable and treatable so long as there is access to clean water. U.S.-supplied Saudi bombs and missiles, however, have destroyed much of the Yemen's water and sanitation infrastructure, while the air, sea, and land blockade has deprived the country of fuel needed to run whatever systems have survived the onslaught. Meanwhile, at least 50% of Yemen's healthcare facilities have been destroyed. According to the Red Cross, fully 80% of the Yemeni population now lacks access to food, fuel, clean water, and health care, creating conditions for the spread not only of disease but also famine. While 12,000 civilians have been reported killed since the beginning of the war in 2014, this number is vastly eclipsed by deaths from the hunger and disease caused by the war. Last month, the aid agency Save the Children warned that 50,000 children would die before the year's end, while the United Nations has reported that one Yemeni child is dying every 10 minutes from preventable causes. To put it bluntly, Saudi Arabia and its allies and arms suppliers, principally the United States and Britain, are guilty of a world historic war crime that has employed methods against the people of Yemen comparable to those used by Hitler's Third Reich. And by that, they're talking specifically about the combination of modern saturation bombing with the fact that mass starvation is basically being used as a weapon by Saudi Arabia. By the fact that they will not let aid into the country. It's barbaric. Again, to the point where the president actually stepped in and called it out. And also, here's something else that a lot of people don't know about Yemen. Is that the U.S. there are ground troops there. U.S. ground intervention and airstrikes acknowledged by the Pentagon Central Command on Wednesday are ostensibly directed against al-Qaeda, but many of the victims of U.S. operations are civilians, killed in both airstrikes and search and destroy missions carried out by special operations troops on the ground. In an unusually publicized raid last January in central Yemen's Al-Baida province, special operations troops backed by drones and attack helicopters killed 57 people, at least 16 of them civilians, while one American soldier was killed. Washington has been waging a covert drone war against Yemen since 2002. For this year, the number of Yemenis killed in the campaign is estimated at nearly 1,500, according to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. In the same statement acknowledging its ground operations and the dramatic escalation of its bombing campaign, the Pentagon reported that the number of ISIS fighters in Yemen has doubled since the beginning of the year, an estimate that suggests that the U.S. campaign is having little impact outside of killing civilians. And by the way, we talk about this show time and time again. When you kill innocent people using American weapons, whether it's an actual American drone or a Saudi jet fighter firing it, it's a perfect recruitment tool for groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Again, like the enemies of our country far too often they don't have to rely on lies or obfuscation or even direct propaganda. All they have to do is tell the truth. Tell the truth about what America is doing. Because, I mean, the truth is enough. If you're surrounded by ISIS, but you're maybe somebody in your family is one of those 16 innocent people killed, you're gonna get mad. You're gonna get outraged. Who are you gonna get mad at? Is it gonna be ISIS? Well, maybe a little bit. But who dropped that bomb? Who shot your family member? It was an American bullet. It was an American bomb. This is why those people don't like us. And, furthermore, not only, so let's make this distinction right here. There are a lot of people in America who, well, most of America is fed up with these interventionist wars. But it's never a top priority. The biggest anti-war demonstrations in history happened preceding the Iraq War. That went on and is still going on. And honestly, it's been hard to facilitate a broad anti-war movement in America since. We've become resigned to it. War is peace. We're in a state of perpetual warfare, just like Orwell said. And I can talk about the story about these Yemenis who are suffering. But there are not nearly enough people in America who have a truly internationalist mindset, which is to say, I'm just as upset about somebody in Turkey, somebody in Yemen, someone in Libya, someone in Iraq, someone in Afghanistan getting killed, as I am someone here in the United States. And, even, during the campaign, Ajamu Baraka, was criticized for basically, he critiqued Bernie Sanders and how he had kind of a nationalistic platform that did not focus on the bad aspects of our foreign policy. And, he didn't. And a lot of people, people who support war criminals like Hillary Clinton say, oh, she has a much better grasp of it. But it wasn't even that. It was that he was unwilling to take the truly leftist position on military intervention, which is that we should not intervene militarily. But that is so far outside of the metrics of acceptable discussion and discourse in mainstream media today that even anti-establishment politicians are afraid to truly fight it on its own terms and to call it out and talk about what we are actually doing, what our military is actually doing in places like Yemen. So, please keep following this story. And this is from an article on the World Socialist website. And it goes into a lot more detail than what I just laid out right there. So if you want to learn more, again, these articles, I try to make sure to post links to them on our YouTube page. I think I will wrap things up a little bit early tonight. Again, it's the holidays. There's not a whole lot going on. I'm down a couple of co-hosts, and we really did. We touched on all the really important stories. Next week, I'm hoping we'll get the whole gang together, and we're gonna do kind of a post-mortem on 2017. Talk about, I'm not even going to say all, because a lot of stuff happens over the course of this year. We will likely focus on those stories that really didn't crack through the mainstream. Maybe talk about like the most underrated or underreported stories of the year. So anyway, I think we'll go ahead and call the show right there. You have been listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.